Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me here on ThinkTech Hawaii. My name is DeSoto Brown, and I am the host of this program, which is called How Did We Get Here? In which I look back and tell you some stories about the history of Hawaii. And I illustrate these stories with illustrations that come not only from my personal collection, but also from Bishop Museum Archives, which is where I work here in Honolulu. I am the Bishop Museum historian, and I'm also the curator for the archives department. And today I'm going to be talking about something that is relevant for not only Hawaiian culture, but the culture of the United States and, in fact, the world. The picture that you see on the screen right now is an illustration on the cover of a 1950s menu that was used by the American President Lines cruise ship company. And it shows in the foreground a Hawaiian woman. And behind her, you can see that you're supposed to be here in Hawaii by the small depiction of Diamond Head and a canoe offshore. But the really large thing that's taking up all of your attention here is this Hawaiian tiki, as it would be called in the English language, and as it is known throughout the world, really, in many different cultures. But it's not its real name in the Hawaiian language. And this is also not a real tiki. This is a fantasy depiction that incorporates a lot of different elements from different actual tiki. And I'm going to show you, first of all, the story of how this happened and why people are able to even create such fantasy images, but also to talk about something more deep and more important, and that is cultural appropriation. Is it ethical? Is it acceptable for one culture to take elements from another culture, turn them into something totally different, divorced from their original meaning and their original relevance, and turn them into something commercial? Well, I don't have an answer for that, but we're going to explore that. Let's go to the next photo. What is the real term for such a thing as you're looking at right now? Well, the Hawaiian term is ki'i, not tiki. And ki'i is comparable to the English word image, meaning that it covers not only artwork, it covers not only photographs, but it also covers things which are three-dimensional. And that's what you see here. The Hawaiian ki'i were made in a variety of ways of a variety of materials. On the left, you see the most common type of ki'i, that is wood. That's easier to use than some of the other types of materials. And it's also the one which was able to you were able to make the largest ki'i out of those. And this photograph was taken in the 1930s, and admiring these two ki'i is a woman named Lahi Webb, who was an authority on Hawaiian culture and who worked at Bishop Museum for many decades as the guide to the exhibits. She was very close to Hawaiian culture. She was an elderly woman at that point, and she had lived through knowing the times in which people were very well informed on Hawaiian culture. In the center is a different type of ki'i. This is a feathered ki'i. It is made of a woven base, which is sculptural, you could say, because it is assuming this form. And then the exterior is covered with bundles of tiny feathers, tiny colored bird feathers that have been tied together, and then they have been individually lashed to this base. These are very painstaking to make, and not very many of them have survived. And then on the right, you see what is obviously a stone ki'i, but there aren't that many of these, and it's partly because it was more difficult to work with stone to make an image like this. So these are the different types, but the ones that are the most common that have survived to the present day are the wooden ones, like in the picture on the left. So what is the backstory of the Hawaiian ki'i? Well, this is a picture from 1920, a fantasized view, you could say, that is a commemoration of the first American Protestant missionaries to arrive in the Hawaiian Islands in 1820. And this picture was created at the centennial of that arrival in 1920. And it shows in the background a sailing ship sailing towards the shore of the Hawaiian Islands. In the foreground, you see two Hawaiian men looking towards this, and the man wearing the cloak is raising his arms as though he's welcoming these people. But in the foreground is the important part of this for this story, because there is a broken and damaged wooden ki'i lying on the ground. And the reason is that in 1819, the year before the missionaries arrived, the Hawaiians overthrew their own religious system that the ki'i were a part of. And they did it on their own. It was not enforced or forced upon them by outsiders, even though there were outside people here at the time, although not that many. Not too many haole were here yet. But at the time of this overthrow of the kapu system, which was not only religious, but it was also political as well, many of the ki'i were destroyed intentionally by the Hawaiians themselves. So we will never know how many there were in existence at that time. We will never know all the forms that they took because they were intentionally destroyed. Today, obviously, therefore, you are not going to see a lot of ki'i around. If you do see them, they are replicas. Almost certainly, most of the time they are. And here's a place where you can see a great many of them. This is the Pu'uhonua o Honaunau National Historical Park, run by the American National Park Service, located on Hawaii Island. It is at a site which was a important Hawaiian site. Pu'uhonua means a place of refuge. This place was originally, previously in English, known as the City of Refuge, which is a misnomer. It was never a city, which is why it retains now its Hawaiian name. But at this location, you will see many carved wooden replicas of ki'i. And that's what you see in these two photographs here, not only adorning the sign, but also displayed around the national park as it is now, to give a sense of what it might originally have looked like. And of course, by the 20th century, all of the wooden and other objects that had been made of natural materials had long since just deteriorated or been destroyed. So all of what you see today, except for all of the rocks, are replicas. So these are not original ki'i from back when when Hawaiians were carving them. But when you see ki'i today, it's far more likely that they aren't there for educational purposes. They are there for commercial purposes. And this photograph shows a very large ki'i, replica ki'i, not a real one, which used to stand at the Windward City Shopping Center in Kaneohe on the island of Oahu. And it stood in front of a restaurant which was called Tiki Tops. And you can see matchbook designs from Tiki Tops to the right of this particular screen. This, again, is not a real one, and it was carved from a very large koa log by an artisan at the time. Well, it was put up in 1958, and it is long gone today because there's no more Tiki Tops, and it also deteriorated being made of wood. But the artist was influenced by real ki'i, and that's something that I'm going to get to in just a second, even though this is not true. And again, this brings up the subject of, is such cultural appropriation acceptable? Well, think about it. Another sculptor who was very well known for working in this idiom was a modern artist named Edward Brownlee. And he worked from the 1950s into the 1970s. And he didn't just work in wood, he worked in metal as well. He was very well versed and very skilled in a lot of different types of creating art. And he was used a great deal for commercial art. He was used by corporations, companies, businesses to create art for indoor or outdoor display of different types. And here are three replica ki'i that he carved, which stood first in Waikiki and then at Ala Moana Center. The ki'i on the two ki'i on the let me see, yeah, the two ki'i on the left are from 1959. They were commissioned and placed outside a clothing store in Ala Moana called McInerney. And the one on the right was outside McInerney's Waikiki location. And it had opened the previous year or two, 57, 58 is when he created this. And this was at a time when these carved ki'i replicas, or ki'i replicas in general, were very popular, not only here in Hawaii, but in the United States and elsewhere, even internationally. And it was at a time of what we call now the tiki fad, in which a number of restaurants and bars were created with exotic interiors that were all fantasy views of an amalgamation, usually of Pacific cultures and some Asian cultures. None of them were real, but they were a potent and enjoyable fantasy for a number of people, carried along with with the use of exotic cocktails, of which the Mai Tai was the most famous. But these three ki'i are gone. They have been gone for many years. They deteriorated out because they were outdoors and they were wood. But also, the McInerney stores have been out of business for over 20 years now. So there's no trace of these anymore. And most of the ones that used to exist like this are gone as well. Now, if ki'i are so rare, how is it that people are able to make replicas of them, to make copies of them, to create amalgamation sort of fantasy copies of them? Well, it's because of the very few that survive, the bulk are in the Bishop Museum collection here in Honolulu. And today, if you go to Hawaiian Hall, and you can see that these are images, these are pictures of the interior of Hawaiian Hall, you'll see on display a great many of the surviving ki'i that can still be viewed today. And these photographs show you what those look like. Ki'i could be anywhere from very large, carved from a single large tree trunk, to really small, just being tiny like this. They assume many different forms. Their faces have many different forms. And yet, because we have so few left, we have no idea of what the full range of ki'i used to be like. Now, what was the purpose of them? Ki'i were to represent different spiritual beings, different deities, gods, and all types of other spiritual entities, because Hawaiian religion was filled with different spirits, different gods, different types of supernatural creatures. Many of them were like humans, many could assume the form of humans, but they were of many, many potential forms. And any individual entity could assume different forms. So in nature, you never knew if you saw a bird, if that was just a regular bird, or was it one of the spiritual entities in the form of a bird that you were seeing and hearing. In any case, here are some of the pictures. Here are pictures of just a few of what is left. But again, emphasizing that what is left, we do not know how many more there were or how many other forms there were that ki'i took. The most famous ki'i, the one that you will usually see being used as the inspiration for other types of copies, is this one. And at first glance, it may look like this is all the same large carved ki'i. And in fact, no, it's not. These are three different pictures of three different objects. The one on the left comes from the British Museum. He lives at the British Museum now in London, England. The one in the center is at the Peabody Essex Museum in Massachusetts. And the one on the right is from Bishop Museum here in Honolulu. All of them represent a god named Ku, one of the most important gods in the entire pantheon of Hawaiian gods and goddesses. And while all three of them are very recognizably similar, and you can tell they're all the same entity, each one differs from the others when you look at them more closely. And the amazing and wonderful thing for me to be able to experience once, some years ago, was when the other two ki'i were brought back to Honolulu and loaned to Bishop Museum to be displayed alongside the one that lives there. So all three were together, and you could look and see the differences in them, even though obviously the similarities are very strong. And it was really powerful and very exciting for me to be able to experience this. Well, where you can see again that there are differences, but the one that has been the most famous because he has been on exhibit for so long is the one at Bishop Museum. And here are two pictures of Ku. The picture on the left as he appears today, standing in the center of Hawaiian Hall, the largest exhibit area at Bishop Museum. And on the right is a photograph taken about 50 or more years ago in the early 70s of Ku as he was displayed at the time. And the reason that this Ku image is so famous is because he has been on display continuously in Bishop Museum for the public to see since probably at least 1903, and if not that, maybe a little earlier than that, certainly since 1903. Originally, if you look carefully in the picture on the left, on the right, excuse me, you can see on the wall behind him are the letters that spell out Kuka'ilimoku. And for a long time, this was the name he was given at Bishop Museum and how he was identified. Kuka'ilimoku is one of the tens of thousands of different forms that the god Ku can appear as or manifest as, or that he contains. So Kuka'ilimoku is a war god, but it was decided at some point, and I don't know the background of why, to rename him just as Ku and to not identify him specifically as Kuka'ilimoku. But that's the way I knew him when I was growing up, because that's the way the museum identified him. People in the outside world didn't really know about Ku for a long time. And it wasn't until these postcards were published in 1940 that his image was disseminated widely for the first time. And this is a set of 13 picture postcards, photo postcards, that Bishop Museum published and sold beginning in 1940. And these are 3 of the 13. And as you can see, each of these is a different figure, a different ki'i. But I've placed Ku in the center because he is the one, not only the most important of these, because within the Hawaiian pantheon of gods, but also because he's the one who was going to become the most famous. And Bishop Museum made use of Ku not only for photographs, but this is an interesting situation. This is a carved replica made of wood of Ku, who resembles the original one. And this carved replica was created at Bishop Museum. And in this photograph, it is being moved out of the museum into a moving van from the front door of Hawaiian Hall. And it's going to be sent to the New York World's Fair. And the New York World's Fair occurred in 1964 and 1965. And there was a Hawaii pavilion at this fair. A whole structure, a whole building was made just to represent the Hawaiian Islands. And a variety of events occurred there. But Bishop Museum was hired by the state of Hawaii to do the design of the interior and create all the interior displays there. And that's why Ku, this replica of Ku, was made, sent to New York, and then brought back. And I don't know where he is now. I don't know where this replica ended up, but it's not on exhibit. So when Ku became famous as part of the tiki fad, starting in the 1950s, let's look at some of the ways he appeared in advertising, or replicas of him, or depictions of him occurred. And these 2 paper pieces both happen to have been created by United Airlines. And on the left is the cover of a menu, an in-flight menu from about 1955. And in this colorful setting, which incorporates all kinds of just an amalgamation of all these different images and different types of things, Ku is the most important thing that you are looking at. And in a sense, it's good because it is emphasizing the Hawaiian culture as being located in the Hawaiian Islands. It's not just a vacation wonderland, it's also the home of Ku, which is created by Hawaiian people to represent their beliefs. And on the right is a poster for United Airlines, and this is from about 1970. And the key that you see here is not literally as close to the real Ku as the one on the left, but still, it bears elements that make it clear that it is inspired by Ku. And we're going to see a little bit more of that right now as we continue. Here are two things from the 1960s. On the left is a clothing label for a brand of locally made clothing. It is called Surfa Tiki, or Tiki Surfa, I should say. And there is Ku on this label surfing, which is amusing, but it's also thought-provoking. And on the right is the cover of a book intended for children. It is a textbook, like a school textbook, or not necessarily a school textbook, but it was a children's book from the 60s. And the cover illustration was created by Herb Kane. And you may remember Herb Kane as being a very important figure who was one of the people who revived long-distance canoe voyaging. He was one of the creators of the Polynesian Voyaging Society, which in turn built the Hokulea, and that began its long-distance journeying back in 1976. And if you look at this picture, which was again created by Herb because he had started and at this point was working as a commercial artist and still living in Illinois. He was living in Chicago, Illinois at the time because he had been born in Wisconsin, interestingly, even though his father had been born and raised in Waipio Valley on Hawaii Island. Anyway, Herb rediscovered his Hawaiian roots and he eventually moved back here. But before he did, he was still working as a commercial artist, and this is his work. And obviously, there, right in the foreground, staring at us, is a copy of the Ku figure from Bishop Museum. 3 comic book covers that also incorporate the image of Ku. On the left, Scooby-Doo. This is referred to as a graphic novel, not a comic book. That sounds cheaper. But the plot of this particular story of this publication is that the 4 Scooby-Doo characters, along with Scooby-Doo the dog, are being chased out of a place here in Hawaii for some reason by what looks like a living ki'i. And that is who is on the surfboard that's scaring all of them as they're in the ocean. It turns out in the story that that's not a manifestation of Ku, but it's an actual human being who's wearing a costume trying to scare them away. And this is really a fantasy. And again, because you can see that the Ku figure has 4 arms, which Hawaiian ki'i never did. But this is fantasy. In the center, the Punisher, who is a superhero, he's kind of an Avenger. And in the background, while he is visiting Hawaii, and this is one of a series of comics that showed his adventures when he was in the Hawaiian Islands, are 3 figures which, again, look clearly not like the real thing, but do resemble it. And finally, on the right, Dennis the Menace in Hawaii from 1969. And this is one of several comic books, Dennis the Menace character visiting the Hawaiian Islands, which were published from the 50s and 1960s. And in each case, you can see that even though these are not literally replicas of what the Ku figure looks like in Bishop Museum, all of them do have the same element of the mouth configuration. This is referred to as a figure 8 mouth because of the way it bulges out on the sides and then gets narrower in the center. All of these, I should say, bear that same figure 8 mouth. And finally, all of these pieces are from the 1950s. On either side are brochures, one of them for Transocean Airlines and the other for Queen Surf Restaurant and Nightclub. which used to stage a luau at least once a week, if not twice a week, from the late 1940s up to the early 1970s. And in the center is a sticker that you could put on whatever you wanted to, with ku in the background. Now, having seen all of this stuff, now it's time for the harder discussion, which is cultural appropriation, as I mentioned at the beginning. Cultural appropriation, is it okay? Well, it can be argued for both sides. On one hand, as I said earlier, to keep aspects of traditional Hawaiian culture going, even in ways like this that you have seen. There is something positive about that because it means it is not forgotten. It means it has not been entirely destroyed. It means it has not been entirely suppressed. Because even though the ki'i that were originally in existence, that were created by Hawaiians, were mostly destroyed by Hawaiians, so it was not outsiders who came in and ordered it. Even so, that the replica or the ones that survived are treasured and that are still in existence for us to see is very important because the physical tie to traditional Hawaiian culture is a way that we can keep it going. But at the same time, when these get turned into ceramic tiki mugs and they get turned into figurines and they get turned into things made of plastic and they get turned into metal and they get turned into things that you put on your car or from your rearview mirror or that you wear, all of those things are for commercial purposes. They're being made so somebody can make money from them. Is it acceptable to turn something which was a symbol of a religious, spiritual belief into something like that? Well, a lot of people find that uncomfortable, and I can find that uncomfortable if I think about it too. But another problem is in this discussion, is there somebody who can give permission for this? Is there someone you can go to say, I want to make this replica? Is that acceptable? Am I being properly thoughtful as I do it? Well, the reality is there is no person or entity or group or organization that controls these aspects of Hawaiian culture that can give permission. So in the case of Ku, his image has long since passed the stage where somebody could try to say, no, you can't do it. There is nobody who is an authority who can have that level of control. None of us today would turn that level of authority over to one single person or one group. Furthermore, it's a done deal. All of these things have already been created. They've been in existence for many, many decades. You cannot go back and undo what was already done. So as you can see, I don't have a final answer for this, but I do want to put it out there for people to think about. If you're going to a tiki bar and you're having a cocktail, you're not thinking about cultural appropriation, and yet it would not be wrong for you to be aware of that and to think about cultural appropriation. Thank you for joining me, everybody. I'm DeSoto Brown. That's the end of this particular episode of How Did We Get Here on ThinkTech Hawaii. I hope you will be joining me in the future for future shows as I do them on ThinkTech. And you can, of course, watch them on YouTube, which is where you're probably watching these right now. So till I encounter you and you encounter me next time, thanks for joining me. And until then, aloha.